So we recently talked about Trump's Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, moving to not reimburse certain defrauded students who have been defrauded by the education industry or world. And that's sort of the topic of today's classic interview. We're going back to October of 2014 when I spoke to Mark Naison, who is an expert in corporate influence over education. And we also talked about standardized testing, which I know is important to others in the audience as well. So let's get to my interview with Mark from 2014. Think about it in the context of what we're seeing the Trump administration and Betsy DeVos push now in terms of education policy. I'm joined today by Mark Naison, who is a professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University, also co-founder of the Badass Teachers Association, the largest education activist group in the nation. The topic today is corporate influence on education. And Professor Naison, I think if you were to say to many people, what is the effect of corporations on education? They might come up with something like, oh, is it the kind of corporatization of college? Or is it Doritos and Coca-Cola in vending machines in schools? But we're really talking about something far more sinister, aren't we?
Absolutely. The corporate influence is shaping what every child will learn from pre-K through college. And it's being done largely through influencing government bodies to impose curricula that teachers think are burdensome and inappropriate and sometimes abusive. And the best example of this is the Common Core standards, which are now being presented as if they were a bottom-up initiative by teachers, educated, and elected officials organized through the states, when in fact, $200 million of Bill Gates' money was given to governors' bodies, to PTAs, to teachers' unions and foundations to try to push this initiative. And when we in New York State experienced for the first time tests aligned to Common Core, teachers, parents, and educators were just shocked that this had been imposed on them without any discussion and also without any ability to modify them.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the impetus for, in other words, why do big corporations want to get involved in education? What is the ultimate goal?
Well, one of them is this is a huge market. It's, $788 billion market of government expenditure in education that test companies, technology and software companies all see as a tremendous market if you can standardize teaching enough so you can develop nationwide products for the market. So test companies stand to make huge profits if there is a national curriculum that is uniform across the country. So that's one motive and then people who are trying to develop a procedure to have the entire process digitized stand to make a lot of money from the software. But there's another motivation, and that is that a lot of businesses feel their labor force is not being properly trained by the public schools and want to make sure that there's kind of a uniform level of training so that if somebody graduates from high school, they can be employees who can plug right into their companies.
Do you see a connection, or do you see as two unrelated issues, what you and I have just been talking about for the last few minutes, and the issue of both the rewriting of textbooks with a kind of religious impetus or through a religious lens that we're seeing catalyzed quite a bit in Texas, as well as the fight to teach so-called controversies around, for example, evolution? Do you see those? Are these completely unrelated issues?
These are completely different initiatives. What's very interesting is that the people behind Common Core are very much opposed to those grassroots conservative initiatives. Uh, so, that's what makes this so complicated. Initially, the opposition to the sort of top-down curricular modification was coming a lot from conservatives. And it took a while for liberals and progressives to realize, wait a minute, when big money shapes education policy, that's a subversion of democracy. So there are many issues in education, and one of them is the attempt to try to undermine, teaching that is going on in science and history to present a more religious perspective. But then there is an attempt to reshape education policy from the top down in a way that really excludes teachers and parents. So we have a lot on our plate.
And talk to us a little bit about, once we see, or what do we know, I guess, is the best way to ask, about what the effects are on students who go through the education systems that are so influenced by corporation. What then is the effect when they later in life enter the workforce, for example?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I'm a labor historian, and I've done a lot of research in the 1930s when the largest corporation in the country was General Motors. Now the largest corporation in the country is Walmart, which starts off its associates at $7.50 an hour, even though its CEO makes $16,000 an hour. If you are looking at the kind of jobs we're creating, where 7 out of 10 jobs are going to be entry level, moderate to low wage jobs, it seems to me that what we're doing with a lot of these corporate policies, we're not encouraging critical thinking. We're encouraging rote learning. We're encouraging, obedience. We're you're taking out literature, for example, and putting in sort of, very narrow textual analysis. You're removing a lot of studies of history. You're removing hands-on science that is experimental for things which can be done on a computer.
It's amazing as you're saying this, and I don't know if this is my kind of cynical mind going to a dark place. What you're saying, in a way, and connecting it to Walmart as the biggest employer, is reminding me of when I read the great book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where there was a deliberate effort based on the knowledge that if everybody is very intellectually curious and fully equipped with critical thinking and other resources, there are many jobs that they simply would not do, they would not tolerate. Thus, there were people that were educated or raised in a particular way to tolerate those jobs.
David, you are right on target. I actually have a former student who's now a professor at LSU. Her next book is going to be on the Walmartization of education. What we have is an enforced standardization from the top down to reduce education to the lowest common denominator and take the creativity out of the classroom. And we're starting kids from pre-K. We're removing play. We're removing recess. All kids do is study for tests. And the tests are expensive. So what gets pushed out when budgets are strapped? Arts, music, science, school trips. It's almost like you're making kids adapt to a brave new world of low-paid work where they have little autonomy and authority.
In the last bit of time we have here, can you give our audience some ideas as to how they can work to counteract what we're seeing?
Okay, the best thing you can do is, if you think testing in your schools are excessive, have your kids refuse to take the tests. There is a growing movement of test refusal or opting out around the country.
And you're talking about the standardized tests, right? Not just tests within class.
Tests.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm also saying, if your kids have recess canceled to study for tests, tell the school that's unacceptable. Tell the schools that there are too many tests. For example, in New York State, our third graders take 6 days of tests, 90 minutes a day. They take more tests than you take to get into law school or medical school. I think I go back to the 60s, and to me, the most horrible bipartisan initiative in my lifetime before this was the Vietnam War. And the part of the way we stopped it was to resist what we thought was an unjust war. Now, the most destructive bipartisan initiative is test-based education policy. And I think we have to resist the tests. Teachers, parents, students, I'll give you a number. Before No Child Left Behind, the average public school gave 6 tests a year. Now they give 17. This is way out of hand. And the only people who can stop it are parents, teachers, and older students by basically saying, we won't take the test unless you cut back. And if you're going to spend money in our schools, spend money on things that make kids love school, which is hard. And also stop scripting teachers and constantly judging them on the basis of test scores and coming in and observing them on rubrics where you check off little things. Trust your teachers to teach.
All right. We've been speaking with Professor Mark Naison, Professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University. Really a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It's a very important subject. And I think people don't realize what's going on until they talk to parents about what's going on with their kids in school.